Hi folks, Tom Kooy here with Ann Arbor Shield, episode number 5 I believe it is. Thanks for joining us, and I'm continuing to want to improve the show, so what I'll say at the inception here of this show is, if you have some suggestions that aren't going to violate the FCC or something like that, do me a favor, shoot me an email at tkoy@a2gov.org, all right? Shoot me those suggestions, comments, good or bad. I'd prefer constructive criticism, but I'll take whatever you got. Today on the show, we have a special treat. We really do, and I am very honored that both these guys have joined me. To my right is retired Major Howard Zeck, who retired in 1978 when I graduated high school. And yes, that's still old, I understand that. But anyhow, so Howard retired in 1978 as a major, and to his right is Officer Pete Stipe, who I worked with briefly during my career, and you retired in?
2004.
2004. So they have joined us on the show today. I honestly can't tell you, I'm not serious very often, which usually gets me in trouble with my superiors, but I can't tell you how much it means that both of you would take the time to come on the show today, and I think the three of us will have a good time. Hopefully the audience will learn something they didn't know before and maybe wish they hadn't known something before by the time we finish. But here we go. All right. So, Howard, we'll start with you. Tell us just a little bit about when you started, what your career was like. I mean, you went all the way through major. A lot of the folks out there aren't familiar with the ranks or anything, but is that right below deputy chief? I mean, you were like 3?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, so I'll let you just kind of narrate how you got to be a cop, what year. Go ahead.
Okay, I joined the Ann Arbor Police Department on May 21st, 1951. I was just recently out of the Army and looking for a career. I had a brother-in-law on the Ypsilanti Police Department who encouraged me to try this. I applied Ann Arbor and Ypsi, and Ann Arbor took me first. In those days, you started out by walking a beat for a year and graduate into a car. But in my case, we had a young nurse murdered up by University Hospital that fall, just about when school was opening. And we did away with the beats for a while and put everybody in cars, and I only went back to the beat occasionally. But that's where you learn to be a cop and to communicate with the public. In those days, you had no radios, you had no communications, except once an hour you pulled the call box and let the station know you were okay. But then I graduated, did about 10 years as an officer, and then started getting promotions and went from sergeant through lieutenant, captain, and finally major when I retired. I was in charge of the uniform division, patrol traffic, and university. By the way, we had a squad of men that policed the university.
Okay. Now you said something that was really interesting. I thought, because I guess my heart is also on the beat. I started policing in a small town on the west side of the state. But you made a comment that's really where the essence of where you learn how to be a police officer. So tell me a little bit what you mean by that particular phrase. I mean,
well, when you're walking a beat, and if you run into trouble and have no communications, you've got to, you might have 4 or 5 guys fighting and you're just one person. So you soon learn to use something besides your fist, and the nightstick, you're badly outnumbered. But the main thing was walking that beat and getting to know the people, so that when trouble did arise, many times the store owners, the locals on the street, came to your back. And that was the greatest thing you learned on a beat, with no communications, and you can't just holler help and hear a couple of squad cars coming. Yeah. So that was really the place I thought that made really good police officers.
Gotcha. I was talking to, as a side note, retired officer Phil Levine a while back, and we were dialoguing about the beat, because he did that for a number of years in the department. And he made the comment that, the greatest weapon a police officer has is their mouth, their ability to speak, to communicate, and to either calm down the situation or take control of the situation, what have you. But I don't know, that resonated with me when he said that. I'm sure you guys would agree with that. Thanks, Howard. Okay, so Pete Stipe, I worked a little bit with Pete. So we had a few calls together, and he is yet another legend in his own time. If you mention Pete Stipe's name, most people know who you're talking about. So, Pete, when year did you start? Give us a little snippet.
I grew up in Ann Arbor, and I was working at a place called Allied Automotive with a Ann Arbor firefighter, a guy named Chet Brown, and he had suggested I apply to the city with the fire department. And the fire department had a hiring freeze on, so I applied to the building department and was an ordinance enforcement inspector for 7 years there, and I got to know the city very well. I'd grown up in the city, but I got to know, every business and every address. And on a walk to the bank one day, I was recruited by the police chief at that time, Bill Corbett. He asked if I'd ever thought about being a police officer, and I said I hadn't, but he asked me to apply, and the next thing I know, I was on the road working road patrol, and I really liked being a first responder. I liked being the first one on the scene of an emergency and trying to make some sense of a chaotic scene. I was an in-service detective for a while. I didn't like that follow-up, but I really liked being the first one there. So I worked I was on the SWAT team for 15 years, and I liked the enhanced training. I thought it equipped me better to be a road patrol officer because in situations like that, you're the first one sent. So I wanted to know what the secret handshake was, or whatever they knew that nobody else knew. And so I really liked doing that. But I really took pride in being a uniformed road officer. I thought there was no doubt about who you are or what your intentions were, and I liked doing that, and that's how I retired as a road officer.
Yeah, I was talking with Pete earlier, and Joseph Wamba had a series out in the 70s, a couple of them, one being The Blue Knight, about an officer in uniform walking the beat, and the other was a police story, but that was about detectives. And we both commented to each other that it was really the essence of seeing the officer in the uniform because of the symbolism and the honor, that comes with seeing any police officer walk the beat or being out of their car and walking, so I appreciate that as well. Okay, so I burned a clip, or as Tim would say, he ripped it from YouTube on police officers, filmed in England, 1945. Whether it was after the war, I don't know. But I wanted you guys to see this and then just comment on it briefly if you would. So anytime you're ready to roll the film, we're good.
That's our first thought in an emergency. Fetch a policeman. He'll know how to handle it. Now, why are we so certain of this? We'll have to put back the clock a long time to find out. Here's the first reason. Years ago, when he decided to try and join the police, he had to produce guarantees of good character. And he had to have a certain physique, height and girth, and a high standard of physical fitness. And there were other qualifications.
Now, you've had a medical examination and an educational paper. Now you're going to have an intelligence test. In this test, the man with the superior education has no advantage over the others. Is that clear?
Yes, sir. If he passed all these preliminary tests, he was accepted as a recruit. But even before he started training, he took an oath.
And that while I continue to hold the said office, I will discharge the duties thereof to the best of my skill and knowledge.
And that while I continue to hold the said office, I will discharge the duties thereof to the best of my skill and knowledge.
Faithfully, according to law, without fear, favor, affection, malice, or ill will. That is the oath of service to the public that the policeman we call on has sworn. And we know that he's a proper man to bear this responsibility, an intelligent man to make decisions, and a fit man to carry them out. But there's another reason we call on him with confidence. He knows what to do. He knew that it was wrong for unskilled helpers to attempt to move the driver before he had satisfied himself that there was no internal injury. He knew how to dress wounds, how to secure an upper arm fracture. In fact, he knew how to handle a situation. What cooperation to seek from the public, and what aid to call in from his own headquarters.
Police information room. Accident at Rand Street and Ledson Street.
Yes? Yes? Yes. Right. Ambulance, junction of Rand Street and Ledson Street.
Calling M5.
M2 Mile Control calling M5.
Blue Rover Saloon, EOH745, failed to stop after accident at Lady Wood. Now proceeding towards Coventry. Intercept. Further details to follow.
Message received and understood. M5 closing down.
In any town or village in Britain, the ordinary constable can set the police machine in motion. It's an efficient machine, but its efficiency depends on the individuals who make it, finally on the constable on his beat. Let's turn back the clock again to see how he became efficient. He's on parade for the first time, with a shiny new truncheon, a whistle he's never blown, and an empty notebook.
Return your appointments. 1 beat, 208. 274. 350. 438. 5136. 683. 7172. 868.
Why did I pick such an obscure nor clip to show today? For two reasons. One, to show that police work in the essence of police work, which was, by the way, brought to the world by Robert Vincent Peale, or is it just Robert Peale? Anyhow, which is where Bobby came from Robert. But anyhow, he's the one that instituted badges and assigned areas and all that other stuff. So it's the historical perspective of police work that doesn't change. And the second aspect is just a personal note that it really strikes me when I see this clip of men that were doing the same job we're doing, albeit different means. And it's an honorable profession that hasn't changed over the years. And yes, there are bad apples that need to be removed. So I will acknowledge that at the outset. Howard, you and I were talking at break a little bit, something very interesting with regard to this film.
Well, in 1953, the Cold War was really taking off, and I was chosen from the Ann Arbor Department to take the training with the U.S. Fifth Army, and we received a week of training that the Bobbies in London got and that the Civil Air Raid Wardens received during World War II. I found it very, very interesting. We got a little bit more than I was used to here when we had an unexploded bomb to worry about. But in dealing with the people and seeing what they were going through, and the thing I noticed is, when you had to go into an air raid shelter every night, but how the Bobbies would be able to put the people at ease. Wow. And the old beat officer, he really paid off. And wow. And he had a few worries too on his own those days.
Yeah, and when you say that, and I think of that shooting a while back, that we had the mass shooting, and the officer that exclaimed, don't worry about it. I'm the one that's going to be take the first round. And like I said, police work in the essence of what a good police officer is has never changed over the years. What were your thoughts, Pete? And Pete, by the way, is writing a book entitled
A Flicker of Recognition.
Flicker of Recognition, which is excellent. Leave it to Pete. What were your thoughts, man?
I saw some parallels in that film and police work. Even today, the recruits were taking an aptitude test, and they said that a college degree wasn't necessary. And in large part, what's necessary is common sense. And they recruited. There was a composite officer in the 60s, a guy of a certain size, either a war veteran or somebody from the UP, and those guys were recruited because they did have common sense. They weren't all, all college graduates. More women were admitted when it was realized that size wasn't everything. It was how to communicate, and I remember seeing, and they also mentioned the police knew what to do. And I remember seeing the movie Serpico, where he describes how he got interested in police work, and it was some kind of chaotic scene on his block as he was a kid, and when the crowd parted, he saw the uniformed officers, and everybody was saying, "What's going on? What's going on?" And he said to himself, "They know," and he wanted to be the one who knew, and in large part, that's what drew me to police work too. I wanted to be the one who knew what was going on in an emergency.
It's a good way to put it. Only a writer can talk like that, by the way. Make sure you get his book when it comes out. One of the things you commented on just now, I'd like to get your definitions of it, if you will. You said a good police officer possesses common sense, which of course I agree with, and some would argue that I have some, but we'll save that for another time. Howard, what would be, you did policing for how many years?
27 and then 37 years.
37 years. 37 years of police work. How would you define common sense, especially as it relates to police work? But let's face it, you either have common sense or you don't. I mean, I can't teach it to you, right? So,
probably the thing that that gets you to thinking common sense is listening to people and knowing the situation you're going into. You have a lot of hours out there on the beat, and you're thinking about what might show up next, and it happens awfully fast. But by and large, pre-planning, knowing the people, knowing the area, knowing what to expect, and I guess just good common sense.
Yeah. It is true, though. I mean, we've all been around a little bit, and we've had a lot of excellent, highly intelligent people hire on initially to this department, as I'm sure others have. But there is that element of common sense that you can't teach it, you can't learn it, and you either have you. But anyhow, go ahead, Pete. What was your?
Well, every time an officer has contact with a citizen, they're setting up that person for their next contact with the next officer, and it doesn't make any sense to unnecessarily alienate people from the police. One of your weapons is discretion. It's not practical to enforce all the laws all the time. So you have to pick and choose. When is the right time to enforce this particular law? As far as motorists, traffic,
right.
That sort of thing. But you in a town the size of Ann Arbor, 110,000 people, you're going to run into the same people again and again, and so you want to make sure that you leave somebody feeling like they were treated fairly and decently. Yeah. There's not time to debate every lawful order or every request, because sometimes time is of the essence. But when there is time, you can explain to somebody, why there was this intrusion, why there was this detention or this delay in going from here to there, and people will accept a reasonable account of why they were involved with the police most of the time.
It's a valid point. Very valid point. We're going to switch gears a little bit to my next subject. So it's now 1993. I had just started in police work in a small town, and because there's a little bit more time in a small town to do nothing, I stumbled across this FBI study on police officers killed, that being in 1992 at the time. And out of that study was a bit of a chilling realization that a lot of the behavioral descriptions ascribed to the officers that were shot and killed, I found myself identifying with. And those were friendly and well-liked by the community and department, used less force than other officers in similar situations, perceived self as more public relations than law enforcer, uses force only as a last resort, does not call for or wait for backup, tends to look for the good in others, is laid back and easygoing, 57% of the offenders, that are those who killed the officers, 57% of the offenders characterized the victim officer that was killed as unprepared. And I guess that was a turning point in my career. And the reason I bring that up is this. We are now in the year 2016. There's a hue and cry for police officers to be friendlier, to be warmer, to be very empathetic. And all of those things I ascribe to and I approve of, and hopefully I've demonstrated over the years, as I'm sure my colleagues have. But this is my point, and I'll talk to my guests about this, is that police work is a balance of being a law enforcement officer and balancing the attributes that we just talked about, to be compassionate and to empathetic. But if you're leaning way over, statistics prove, it's not my opinion, statistics and studies have shown that you put yourself in danger if you're at one extreme. And I might point out, if you're the other way, if you're just hard-nosed about it and it's my way or the highway, I would suggest that you're probably going to get yourself in the same jam. So police work is a balance. So I wanted to get your 2 cents on that, the balance aspect of being empathetic and what we would all describe as a good, compassionate police officer versus, allowing your guard to be completely gone and just assuming the best from everybody. You know what I mean? So, Howard, I know you've probably seen some things over the years, so.
Well, a little, I think one of the things that first comes to mind is when I first started riding patrol car, and we rode, other than midnight, you rode single. And it was really a new experience to stop a fellow, a lady, and tell them, I'm stopping you, you did this. And there was always, sir, I stopped you for speeding, and they, come back at you. So I got to thinking about that, and I thought, sir, I stopped this car for speeding. This cotton-picking car, I've had trouble with it, and a little psychology along the way helps. But very, very interesting in dealing with people.
Yes, very much so. That's a good point. Pete, what do you think?
Well, I saw a lot of those characteristics in myself. That you like to believe the best
Sure.
in people, but from a tactical standpoint, there's either known threats where you've got substantiated information that something is a threat, or an unknown threat where you have no information, but the potential is always there. Every traffic stop, every domestic call, really every encounter, you've got to be prepared for the worst, because you don't know what they know. You've got no idea most of the time, where they're coming from and what they're doing. So you really do have to be, hyper vigilant, and that's kind of the life of a police officer. On or off duty, you are hyper vigilant. You sit to your back, you're back to the back wall. You're facing the door in a restaurant. You're even with your family. You're looking here and there for suspicious behavior. You don't rationalize things. You wonder about things, and your curiosity is unquenchable.
This guy's, you can tell this guy's a writer. And no, that's a good point. And even now, and I don't consider myself, over the top a police officer. I mean, there are certain names I can mention that we're all in awe of just being super police officers, and I don't consider myself that. But even when we're eating dinner, my wife will always chastise me, good grief, honey, you're off duty. And I don't even realize it. I'm just constantly scanning and checking, and it's just what we do. It becomes a part of who you are after a while. But you mentioned some good stuff, so I'm going to segue into this. Especially as a police officer in Ann Arbor, that there tends to be at times those who would deny that anything bad actually happens here, that anything could happen. And we could go into, I suppose, why that exists and the psychology behind it. But it's disturbing as a police officer, for instance, when you're in a school and there are a number of people that are very angry and incensed that you are there talking to the kids perhaps on a safety thing, and you have a weapon, and I mean, it still happens today. So I wanted to read this quote to you and then get your 2 cents of it. This is taken from an author Gavin DeBecker, who wrote Fearless. This was right after 9/11. And he makes this quote: "Denial can be seductive, but it has an insidious side effect. For all the peace of mind deniers think they get by saying it isn't so, the fall they take when faced with new violence is all the more unsettling. Denial is a save now, pay later scheme, a contract written entirely in small print, for in the long run, the denying person knows the truth on some level." And it really resonated with me. I have denial in my own life about, usually it's financial issues, but that is, I guess that's kind of what I've observed in my career, that again, there's a segment of the population that denies that this could occur, and as a result, when they see things that bring it to mind that it's a reality, whether it's a weapon we carry, or I once was chastised because we carried at the time shotguns in the car, and this lady was very, very incensed that we did that. So, again, if I could get your comments, now that you're retired and no longer having to worry about being employed, you could just comment openly and honestly about Howard's over here chuckling. No, to comment on that aspect, that there is a sense of denial, and I'm sure you heard plenty of comments over the years of the same thing I was just talking to. So if you could just speak to that would be cool.
Gee, I don't really know where to begin, but true, it does exist in Ann Arbor, and I've now lived here so many years, I'm part of it. But it's dangerous. It's dangerous to be under the idea that it can't happen here. I worry about our schools. I was the first officer to put the uniformed women in the schools, and then the plainclothes women, and then for years we had an officer in each one of the high schools. I just worry because the bad guy out there knows that too.
That's a good point.
And we just must be prepared for everything. We hear it happened in Canada. It can't happen in Canada. They don't have any guns.
Right.
Well, it did happen in Canada. Killed 2 and injured 7. So we must be we must be on the toes all the time and realize it could happen in Ann Arbor.
And you make a good point. Just being prepared. No one is saying get paranoid, and no one is saying we all need to carry guns. No one's, we don't need that. But to be prepared. Yeah. Go ahead, Pete. We got about 2 minutes.
Well, it's human nature to deny things. I think everybody does it to some extent. You stop a motorist for speeding, and you tell them how fast they were going, and they'll insist that they were going the speed limit because they weren't consciously aware of it. And police officers who are charged with some kind of misconduct,
Yeah.
They could be in denial of exactly what they did and when, because when you're the one doing it, it's really hard to get an objective perspective of what you're doing. Ann Arbor is a highly intellectual community. You got a university here and people who really know a lot of things, but there's some practical aspects of life that they're not privy to, and the things that you see really only as a police officer. You see the underbelly of this beautiful town you live in, and you understand that you're a long way from Burns Park. That's where I grew up, and my sister still lives there, and we sparred a few times about certain things the city did or the police department did, because she didn't understand that you have to take decisive action sometimes, and you have to take it now.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, we're going to take a short break, and then we'll be right back.
Oh, what was that? Ah, damn kids. Throwing something in front. Yeah, they threw something in front of my car. Man, I'm just driving along, minding my own business. With the meeting? I ain't gonna be there on time. In this car? Man, try and stop me. Let anybody try and stop me. You know what I'm saying? And so I was like, look, man, if I want your opinion, I'll give it to you. I'll call you back. No, you've got to be kidding me. What did I do, huh? What did I do?
Hey, good morning, sir. Officer Snuffy, Freeway Patrol. Stop today is for your speed. Had you locked in at 92. 92 and a 65. Any reason for your speed today, sir? Officer, I think you might have me confused with somebody else, 'cause I was just going with the flow of traffic. So maybe there was some kind of mistake, 'cause I was just going with the flow of traffic. No, that's fine, sir. Go ahead and remain in your vehicle, and I'll be back up here in just a few moments.
Animal
2126 copies, injured animal in the roadway. I'll be en route momentarily. Alright, sir, this citation is for speeding. If I could get you to sign right there in the red box, please, that'd be great.
Are you serious? You're issuing me a citation? You gotta be kidding me. Do you realize what you're doing? I mean, come on, man. You're like an overpaid meter maid. Do you know how much this car costs? Do you? It costs more than you make in a year, I can tell you that.
And how is that relevant to our situation here, sir?
I don't know, but you know what? It doesn't matter. I mean, come on, man. You should be doing something to prevent people from speeding, not screwing them over when they do it. I mean, seriously, what's that all about, man?
When you were doing traffic enforcement, for instance, and you had someone that you stopped, and what I like about this series of Freeway Patrol, which is out of actually Los Angeles, and is produced by a Los Angeles officer at this time, is very well done. Is that he's always professional, you know, when he's carrying out. So maybe you could share a story or just a comment on maybe what you've observed over your career when it comes to particularly traffic enforcement, maybe even speed if you want to go that far, but just maybe a story or something that can bail me out of this awkward situation that I find myself in, having lost half the cartoon. But anyhow, go ahead, Howard.
Many memories come back. Many memories of, well, they were very interesting at the time. I don't know if it'll be interesting to your
I'm sure
audience.
they will be.
Some of them I'm not going to repeat. But it was just extremely interesting to know that when you stopped a car, you're never stopping the same person twice. It's a complete different individual, and you can get some awful surprises, especially in a campus town.
Oh, I'll bet.
But it just, so many memories come back, I wouldn't even know where to start. But
Pick one.
Oh, dear. Well, I stopped a young lady for speeding quite fast, and in those days they were the hostesses from the Willow Run Airport. A lot of them lived in Ann Arbor because the main Detroit airport was Willow Run. And stopping this lady, and walked up very professional, and she said, "Are you going to give me a ticket, or you and I are going to make love when I get off duty tonight?" That's quite a quick question, I know. She got a ticket. You're glad to know that, Dorothy, that she got a ticket.
And you said you didn't have any good stories, Howard. That's outstanding. Very good. Go ahead, Pete. I'm afraid to ask you after on the tail end of that, but go ahead.
Well, one interesting traffic stop. We stopped Pat Hughes and I stopped a Lincoln Town car for making a prohibited left turn off of Main onto West Huron, and all four of the occupants were dressed in pinstripe suits. And I'm talking to the driver, and the back window goes down, and the back passenger leans over and says, "Officer, you and I have the same last name." And it was Michael Stipe, who was the lead singer of REM. And
oh, wow.
And I gave him a real deadpan reply, "Yeah, I know who you are," and got the license and registration, and went back to the car. Well, a month before, my boys had gone to see REM. My older sons had gone to see REM at Chrysler Arena, and I gave them a note to introduce them because they had the same last name. And he and Mike Mills invited them backstage to their dressing room and posed for a bunch of pictures and signed a bunch of T-shirts. Were really gracious to them. So I went back up and reminded them of of that gesture, and they were here for an Allen Ginsberg tribute at Hill Auditorium, and were looking for the restaurant there at State and William Ashley's, and they were just turned around. But the look on his face, because I totally stonewalled him, but I patched it up before he left. But you see a lot of interesting things in traffic sometimes.
And you never know, do you? I mean, like Howard said, the most innocuous stop, I don't care what time of day or night it is, and you get up to the car and a whole story unravels before your eyes about whatever it is.
One of the strangest things is that people who are lost have a tendency to drive so fast trying to get their bearings. You'd think that's when you'd slow down to get oriented,
right.
But
good point.
But you stop a lot of people just flying, and they don't know where they're going.
Good.
Stopped the car for running a red light at Main and Huron one day about during noon, and I walked over to the car, and as I walked up, and they were high school kids, boys, and told them I stopped them for running the red light, and the guy on the right side pulled out of his jacket a revolver, and I went for mine, and I knew that I was going to lose because I was looking right at it, but I caught it. It was a dummy.
Oh.
And you could see the blocked out. And needless to say, that young guy went down to the station, called his father, but there, but for the grace of God.
Absolutely.
Shot a very innocent boy.
Yeah, absolutely. How fast. And that's one thing that's always, even to this day, it has amazed me about police work, is how quickly things can change. I don't care if you're taking a lunch break. I don't care if you're having coffee with your best buddy in the parking lot and you're sharing stories. Things can change, I mean, within seconds. And your transition from this state of mind to a total emergency and could be life-threatening. But anyhow, as an aside. Okay, I did have some questions, actually, some serious questions for you guys, now that we've had some good laughs. No, I just want to throw this out there. We were doing our show a while back, and this kid was probably 17 or so, and he said, "Can I ask you something? Why do you guys and gals do what you do? I mean, when you consider all the negatives, especially now, what? He was kind of incredulous, like, I mean, are you in your right mind kind of thing? But I think he was sincere. So I'd like to ask you that, and to ask you what inspired you to put the badge on, take the oath, and to be a police officer?
I don't know. Well, I was looking for work. I'd just been out of the Army and tried farming, and that didn't work. And my brother-in-law was on the Ypsilanti department, and he was very, very happy. And so I just, that's how I got started. I applied and used to the uniform, wearing it in the military. I enjoyed the uniform, and I stayed in uniform all my years there. And so looking for a job, and thank God I found the right one.
Yeah, and at what point, I think hopefully each one of us had a point in time when you started your career that, within the first year, let's say, an event takes place or something takes place, and you say to yourself, yeah, this is the right, this is my calling, this is what I was meant to do, that's why I'm here. Was there
I had several opportunities for far more money. Because when I started working, my salary was $3,400 a year. Wow. But I was a lieutenant, and I had a good friend who was working for the National Safety Council, and he came to me and proposed that they would like to hire me, give me 3 of the Midwestern states to cover, and the pay would be $11,000.
Wow.
And I had talked over to my wife, and I just thought it would be a great way to go. And prior to giving him the word, I got called in and promoted to captain at $11,000. So I had several offers, but I knew where I was going to stay.
Outstanding story. All right, Pete.
Well, my parents were both stricken at home when I was a kid. My mom died suddenly at home, and my dad was whisked to the hospital and never came back. And both those times, the police were coming. We lived on courts or cul-de-sacs that were kind of difficult to find, and I was dispatched down to the corner each time to flag the patrol car down, and it went the wrong way both times. And that left a lasting, frustrated impression on me. And I wanted to be the first one there for people. There is tremendous relief when you have an emergency, especially involving a family member. You feel so responsible. But once emergency personnel arrive, you're really relieved of a great deal of your responsibility. You know, you're relying on them to come through. And even if I didn't know medically what was wrong with somebody, you know, that gave me a great feeling to be there as quickly as possible, so people didn't have to wait. And that's what I wanted to do, and that's really why I focused on patrol work, because that was the most rewarding thing. Because moments, seconds really count.
Sure.
When somebody's waiting, you know, people call on the phone, and you can get kind of lost in your occupation. And you're not really conscious of that feeling that people have when they're waiting. You know, certainly when you're following a car in traffic, when a patrol car is following you in traffic,
sure.
You get a feeling that's unlike any other sensation. And when you're the officer, when you just happen to be going the same way, you can be completely oblivious to what this terror or anxiety that you're imposing on somebody. But I wanted people to have that feeling of relief of having the police there. So I knew I could beat the fire department and usually the HVA, because I had an intricate knowledge of the city, of where to go. Then I loved to fly to those calls and be there in time. So that's kind of what fired me up to do it when I was offered the job.
And it seems only fair I throw my 2 cents out. One was an older brother who at the time I worked for Kalamazoo, and I remember riding my first midnight shift and saying to myself, as he interacted with different people, and he was compassionate and empathetic, but and it was being out, at the time of night when no one else is out. You know what I mean? When only usually bad guys are out at that time, and that whole experience it left me awestruck, and I was bitten, as they say. That and 1 Adam 12 did play a huge role as I watched these actors go about their job as officers in Los Angeles at the time.
There was an authenticity to that.
Yes, absolutely. And then we were discussing, prior to this, that a lot of homework went into making that film. That wasn't just a Hollywood version of police work. Jack Webb did a lot of work, including hiring real police officers and dispatchers, to do the homework on that. Here's one for you. What was the hardest part of human nature to become accustomed to as a police officer? And while you're thinking of that, I'm going to share an embarrassing story. Didn't happen here, that's why I can share it. But this is one thing. Stopped a car, again, working in a small town, but stopped a car on a major expressway, and because that's where the cars were, so that's where I wanted to be. Stopped him, and for some reason I asked him if he had a weapon in the car. He said, yeah, he did. And I said, well, let me have it. That's a true story. Let me have it. So he reaches in his glove box and hands me this revolver, and the cylinder falls out and all that. But the fact is, I had worked in a factory, I'd done all these other things, and I still wasn't acclimated to the fact that we were talking about earlier, that there are bad people out there, and there are people that will lie, even to a police officer. And here I was a police officer, and I still wasn't recognizing all that. You know what I mean? So kind of interesting, but anyway. Go ahead.
I think family fights. How husbands could be so brutal to their wives. Obviously a person they loved, there were little children running around many times in front of the children. Yeah. And that was one of the hardest things I had to deal with, is how a guy who, he loved the woman and probably was a good father, but maybe it was alcohol or money or something they're fighting about. But seeing how men could abuse their wives was one of the hardest things I thought to deal with and couldn't understand.
And as officers, on a piggyback, if you'll excuse the expression, to piggyback on that is when you have kids, or children the same age as those you're encountering on calls, whatever the call may be, I'm telling you, man, that resonates like nothing else. You go to a child not breathing at 3 years of age and your child is at home at 4, that doesn't go away. But anyhow, go ahead, Pete.
Well, I think what surprises you is that some people have no filter. I mean, you're accustomed, you're raised a certain way by your parents. You go to school. I mean, there's certain codes of conduct at school. There's an expectation that you're going to, behave in a certain way and maintain some, sense of decorum. I mean, even when you lose your temper, like if you're playing sports or something, I mean, everybody flies off the handle. But some people, really, they just get to a point they can't control it. They blow up, and the things that people can do to one another, you're not really exposed to it until you get into law enforcement. And some people have no remorse. They feel no sense of guilt or an obligation to do anything about it. They're simply cold-blooded. And in your ordinary course of life, you're not really exposed to people like that. But when you're running call after call, in different neighborhoods where there's somebody like that, and there's somebody that can ordinarily be, a PTO mom or a high school coach, somebody, but sometimes they snap, and it surprises you of the damage that they can inflict, and seemingly not have it bother them.
Yeah.
Because most officers really absorb, everything you're exposed to, and you suppress it because you're too busy to deal with it right now, and it builds up like a pressure cooker.
That is very true. You make an excellent point. I mean, you're not, we've talked about this before, but you're not going to see what police officers see, walk through what police officers walk through, listen to what police officers listen to, day after day, year after year, without being affected to some degree by that, unless you're not human. But I totally agree. We have, let's say we got about 3 minutes yet, so let me pick some good ones, really, really good ones. Oh, here we go. After you retired, what did you, or what do you even now, miss most about being a police officer?
Probably the fellowship of the other officers, the men and women. We had, in having command, you had to take action against officers that you really would not have liked to, but you had to do your job. But the camaraderie that goes in amongst all the wearing of that blue.
Yeah.
And the thing about retiring, that a retired officer retired should not live in the same city in which he worked. Because when I drive down the street, I'll say, and remember, dear, I told you when the young man was killed over here and the boy over there, and she'll say, please.
Can we go to lunch?
But, well, now I've learned to just keep it to myself. Yeah. But, you've seen that baby that died in the patrol car, and you saw that boy who was killed playing ball in the street. And I really would have rather not lived in the town.
That makes a lot of sense.
But
that makes a lot of sense to me, for sure.
Well, I agree with Howard that the camaraderie is probably what you miss most. But there are tangible rewards to police work that you can't get anywhere else. And for instance, being sent to a missing child. When somebody's walked off the porch, the mother's gone into, the toddler's on the stoop, and she answers the phone. She gets tied up, and the toddler is gone. Finding, a kid like that, and the look on a grateful parent's face. I mean, you can't buy that kind of satisfaction or gratification. I mean, there's really only one place you can, any first responder, paramedic or firefighters, they see the same thing, but that you really look forward to those moments. I mean, they're punctuated by moments of abject terror and prolonged boredom, but sometimes you get a call like that, and I miss calls like that. That kind of reward.
Okay, we're going to cut to a film here shortly, and we'll comment briefly on it. And the good news is we're almost done, gents, and you've both done outstanding. I really appreciate you being here. So whenever you folks are ready, you can roll the next film.
and I have to call the murdered, and I have to call the murderers, the murderers.
I said an on-duty sheriff's office deputy was at that gas station pumping gas when they say he was ambushed.
And their NYPD patrol car were shot in what is described as ambush style today in Brooklyn.
We are not your enemy. We are not the enemy. When most people run away, we run too. When most people hide, we're right there for you to see. Regardless of the circumstances, we are right there. We check behind that dark corner that most people will be afraid to do. We encounter shady character that most people would go a mile out of their way not to even encounter. But we do it because we love this city. Most of us get up on a daily basis knowing that this is the reality. On any given day, at any given time, this could possibly be the reality. But yet we leave our families at home and we come and we try to give you our absolute best. Thank you.
As I just mentioned on the break, that particular clip is it's very moving on a number of fronts for anybody who is or has been a police officer. And I don't want to end our show by ending it on a woe is me or woe is us or woe was them, because we all chose to do this. There's no regrets about that. But I did want to get their perspective, as they have now retired, about what's transpired in this country over the last 2-3 years with regard to police officers, what you would like anyone out there watching to know as a retired police officer, and to keep in mind that we certainly aren't all perfect, and those who aren't perfect need to be held accountable for that. But the vast majority of police officers, day in and day out, are doing exactly what the chief said, the very best they can for those they serve. Pete, we'll start with you and end with you.
Well, 129 officers lost in line of duty in 2015. That doesn't even reflect the ones that were injured or wounded, in the line of duty. That number is in the thousands. There's thousands of encounters with the police, every day. Citizen encounters. There's 680,000 roughly law enforcement officers in the country, and there's millions of people. Those the encounters where police officers had to take someone's life, they amount to less than 1% of those encounters, but they're very highly publicized.
Sure.
And the passings of these officers killed in the line of duty, some 45 of them by gunfire, they're not covered quite as extensively, and we regret that. We understand that we're not in it for the glory. We're in it for the duty, and it's a solemn duty. More solemn when you lose somebody like that. But I think I'm reflecting the sentiment of a lot of officers. We don't think that we're fairly portrayed all the time in the media. It's not. It doesn't sell the media. It doesn't generate stories. And there are officers. There are rogue officers. There are people that shouldn't be in the profession. They should be summarily drummed out and quickly. But they are a mere fraction of the officers that are out there doing the right thing.
Agreed. Howard?
Well, what I would like to relate to the people of Ann Arbor is you don't realize what a fine police department you have. In my 40 years of law enforcement, the officers really, really put out. And where would we be without them, that thin blue line? But I think the people of Ann Arbor just don't know what a fine police department they have. It was there when I went there, it was there when I left, and I'm very satisfied it continues today. And what I would like to see is much better backing out of our citizens.
Thank you, sir. Well, that concludes our episode. I want to sincerely tell you both that it is an honor to have had this time with you, to hear your reflections. And as we end today, I've asked all the questions. If you have any questions within reason that you want to ask me, we got about 1 minute left, or any kind of comments to the audience or anybody else, now's the time. But I just want to let you know that I mean that heartfelt.
Well, seeing how you're nearing retiring, I would like to sponsor you in our Rocebo Club.
I don't know what that is.
ROCEBO. We meet every Friday morning for breakfast, and that stands for Retired Old Cops Eating Breakfast Out.
You got yourself a deal, Howard. All right. Pete, anything?
I think there's a silent majority in Ann Arbor. I think there's a vocal minority, and I do think that we did and we still enjoy an abundance of support, because they rely on us. They know that it's either us or nothing. I think they get great service. I just think that there's a high expectation here, and I think they think that we know that we're appreciated. So I grew up in Ann Arbor. I'm not trying to point fingers at it, but it's different. It's different, growing up here and working here. Certainly different. But I'm really proud of the department and as it moves along.
Thank you both for your service, and I say that because I know that both of you have left and retired honorably, and in many ways have modeled what officers are striving to do today out here. So thank you both very much for being here.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right. That concludes it. As we end today, we have a tribute to 1 Adam 12 set to Law and Order music, which I'm not sure how that all works out, but anyhow. 1 Adam 12, if you get a chance, YouTube it, and that's what many of us, at least that were born in the 60s, cut our teeth on and emulated. So with that, we thank you for watching. Have a good week.